right, welcome to Political Discourse Live with Amao Babajide Samuel. And I'm glad to welcome you on today's live section, which is going to be the second live section we are having since we commenced this enlightenment campaign on leadership and politics. Uh, we want to appreciate those that have consistently followed us on our various social media platforms for the 130 plus subscribers we have on our YouTube channel, Amao Babajide Samuel, to our followers on Instagram at Babajide Amao, and to those that follow us on Facebook, Leadership Discourse with Amao Babajide Samuel. We are indebted to you. We hope we are serving you well with knowledge on leadership and awareness, political awareness, particularly as it has to do with our country, Nigeria. Luckily, in the last 48 hours, the president of Nigeria had signed into law the new Electoral Act 2022. Of course, we know that the last 2-3 election had been executed on the basis of the 2010 Electoral Act, signed into law by the then president of Nigeria, Dr. Ebele Goodluck Jonathan. So having General Muhammadu Buhari signed the Electoral Act 2022 into law is a very great development to the dynamics of how 2023 political game is going to be played, given the advancement in technologies and a number of political development that needs to be addressed in helping the Independent National Electoral Commission to effectively carry out their role of organizing a free, fair, and credible election for our country. As a sharp response to that, just yesterday or the day before yesterday, the INEC had come up with a few guidelines, one of which contains the new adjustment to the date of the election, general election in 2023. And it is glad to know that in the next 364 days or thereabout, Nigerians will be going to the poll on the 25th of February to elect the new president for our country and the members of our National House of Assembly. And I think on the 11th or the 9th of March, we would be going to the poll to elect the 36 governors and members of the State House of Assembly. That means that the political space or the political atmosphere in the country will get very busy and engaged going forward, as all political parties are expected before the end of June, that is just in about 4 months from now, to produce the candidates who would represent them in the general election. And by September, October, it's expected that the political campaigns will start in earnest. So we'll look forward to updating us, sharing our views, our perspective, analyzing the game as it goes, in the bid of keeping us informed and helping us to get politically aware or educated in making the right decision for our country. Political leadership is very key in determining how far a country will grow and develop economically, socially, and otherwise. Because our political actors are the one with the state power or resources to determine who exactly, what exactly the policies, the programs the country is going to pursue within the time frame where they are in power. So we look forward to this active engagement going forward in our political discourse as we begin to make a review of what has happened, particularly in this Fourth Republic, going into the seventh cycle of election that will be taking place. So I want to welcome us again to our live section, and I want to seriously apologize that we came a bit behind schedule. Following the round of votes that we made in respect to giving our live program today a direction for discourse, virtually all persons that voted wanted us to discuss the invasion of the Republic of Ukraine by Russian Federation. Waking up into the early hours of Thursday, we saw on the media the national briefing made by Vladimir Putin, who is the president of Russia, specifying that Russia will be engaging in some special military operation in Ukraine. Flashing back our mind, in 2014, there was an uproar which led to the deposing of the then president of the Republic of Ukraine. At that time, the president of Ukraine was pro-Russia. Pro-Russia meaning that he was always taking his decision in favor of Russia, that happens to be the whole union they belonged to prior to their independence in 1991. As we would have it, the uproar, the civil unrest, led to a situation where he was deposed, he flew to Russia, and Russia had to run a new set of elections where Russia had a new president who was pro-West. Okay, we'll come in terms with a few of these terms as we briefly look at the history. And it was around 2014 that the eastern region, two republics, two major areas in the eastern region felt that they needed to pull away from Ukraine. So they declared that they were going to become an independent state, as it were. That region basically was the Donbas region, and there were two key areas of Donetsk and Luhansk. These primarily were Russian speaking region or part of Ukraine, who share a lot of connection, historic affinity with Russia. And they felt that since the body language of the general Ukraine was favoring anti-Russian policy, it's better they become a nation of their own. This led to civil action taken by Ukraine against these two new self-acclaimed declared republic. But the president of Russia at that time felt they had the freedom to choose whether they would belong to Ukraine going forward or not. So he gave them military assistance to rebel against Ukraine Republic. And ever since 2014, there had been unrest in that region up until just a few days ago, when Vladimir Putin declared that, or recognized officially, that these two regions that broke out of Ukraine would be recognized as a country of its own. And it was on that basis he decided to carry out certain operation, military operation in Ukraine which today has caused a lot of civil unrest in that country. A number of Ukrainians and even foreigners studying and working in Ukraine are trying to find access to neighboring countries to the west of Ukraine just to have safety. Today we just want to briefly look at that. People have actually raised issues as to whether we are heading towards the Third World War, given the fact that the Western Bloc are vehemently against the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk, and there's a tussle of power, between Russia and the Western Bloc, and of course, we all know that Western Russia is a military power with a lot of nuclear weapons, and the same thing with the United States of America. It doesn't look like it's going to end in a third war, but it will be good that we just get ourselves abreast of history so that we can have a better and clearer understanding of how the game had been played in the last century, as the case might be. So I want to welcome us again and I want to appreciate you joining us live on today's political discourse. In 1914 specifically, the First World War started. Prior to the First World War, at that time there were no civilized independent states. What we had majorly were empires. United States of America seems to be like one of the only few modern states that the world had at that time. Many of the countries of the world were ruled by monarchs who were emperors, and there was always conquest, a desire to conquer more lands and be in charge of the space where they belong. In 1870 specifically, there was a war between France and Germany. Maybe I would encourage us as we go on in our discourse, if you have the opportunity, you can just check out the map of Europe so that in the process of this discourse, you can begin to connect the dots and put locations to these various countries as we begin to mention them in our discourse this evening. France and Germany share border. France is a little bit to the west, the southwestern part of Germany, and in that 1870 war, Germany had the upper hand. So Germany occupied some former territories that belonged to France. So there was always a bad blood between France and Germany. All right. So in 1914, there was an incident that led to the First World War. And we had a situation where Prince Ferdinand was assassinated by some young terrorists in Zambia. Okay, all these countries are in Western Europe. Okay, so Prince Ferdinand was the heir to the Austria-Hungary throne. Okay, so after the death of his father, he was meant to be the person that will become the emperor of Austria-Hungary. Okay, these empires eventually became individual countries. We have Austria as a country, we have Hungary as a country. Now, Austria and Hungary share close traits. They share blood with Germany. So when Prince Ferdinand was killed in Zambia, they were asked to make explanations as to why the prince was killed in their land. And Serbia, as a country, was not able to give a satisfactory explanation to Austria-Hungary at that time. So Austria-Hungary declared a war against Serbia. All right. Now, as soon as Austria-Hungary declared a war against Serbia, Serbia got support from Russia because Serbia was more of a socialist or communist state or empire or kingdom at that time. So they share some ideological belief and relationship with Russia. So Russia was equally an empire at that time. So Russia Empire came to defend Serbia against Austria and Austria-Hungary. And immediately because Austria and Germany are like cousins, they are related. Okay, so Germany came in support of their brothers in person of Austria-Hungary Empire, and it became 2 against 2. Before we know what was happening, because of the rift between Ottoman Empire at that time and Russia, Ottoman came to join Germany and Austria-Hungary in executing the war. Ottoman Empire is what today we know as the Republic of Turkey. All right. So, and as soon as Germany entered that war, France went to support. France came to support of Serbia, and it became like a balanced game between about 5 individual nations. Okay, so as the war was going on, France sought for the assistance or support of Britain, the United Kingdom, in executing the war. But at the initial stage, Britain was not active, was a little bit neutral in deciding whether they are going to be in support of Serbia or Austria-Hungary. Please do not forget that the major country that started this war was Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Now, when France and Russia came into support of Serbia, Germany had a problem. Of fighting to the west, fighting France to the west, and fighting Russian Empire to the east, because Russia is equally sharing border with Germany at that time. So they decided that they were going to first focus on fighting France to the west. Then after they have defeated France, they will now go to the north, the eastern part, and fight and defeat Russia. That was the plan. So when Germany started to have its incursion into France, it met an obstruction because France already set their troop to defend France's land, okay, and prevent an invasion from Germany. So what Germany resolved at doing is to go through another route to come in to fight France. And they decided to pass through Belgium, okay, to enter France through Belgium so that they can be able to capture Paris and bring France under its nails. As the case was at that time, Belgium was neutral. So Belgium was neither for Austria-Hungary nor for Serbia. So there was no reason why Germany should have sent its troops to pass through Belgium to enter France. So as soon as Germany entered Belgium, uh, heading towards France. That attracted the United Kingdom, the Great Britain, to join the war, and they formed ally with France in support of France. They formed ally with France and Russia in support of Serbia. So that was exactly what brought these major European countries into the war. So we had two allies. One for France, Great Britain, Russia, and Serbia, and the other for Germany, Turkey, that was Ottoman Empire at that time, Hungary, Austria. So eventually, after about 3.5 years, the war was not definitely clearly won by either of the allies. So Germany decided to launch a full submarine war, because part of the reason why the war was not won was because of Great Britain. And at that time, it was called the World War because at that time, 1 out of every 5 persons in the world was under the control, direct or indirect control, of Great Britain. Great Britain was the largest empire in the world at that time. Okay, if they have not colonized a country, they would at least have signed partnership with or protection with that country, because at that time the Great Britain were the strongest on the sea. Okay, so that created a scenario, a challenge for Germany, because they have conquered France. They've been able to defeat France. Less has been achieved in defeating Russia. Okay, but they needed to they have been able to contain Russia, but they needed to take over the United Kingdom, Great Britain, to be able to defeat them. And they can only defeat them by launching a submarine war against them. It was exactly this decision to launch a submarine warfare against the Great Britain that brought United States of America into the war. Okay, so in April 1917, the United States of America came to defend their brother, that was the United Kingdom, and with the help of Great Britain, with the help of the United States of America, Britain and its other allies were able to defeat Germany. So Germany, at the end of the First World War, by 11th of November 1918, surrendered. Partly because, there were famines, there were revolutions, even in Germany itself, that made it difficult for Germany to continue in executing the First World War. So they had to surrender, and it was like 5 countries or 6 countries, eventually against one country that failed to give up on the war. Shortly after the war, there was a meeting in 1919, I beg your pardon, where all these major countries that won the war, that is Russia, United Kingdom, and France, came together to sign an agreement that would prohibit Germany from continuing in any further aggressive expansion of its territory. And apart from that, they were sanctioned. A lot of punishment were sanctioned. There were monies that the German Empire, was made to pay. So Germany, in short, was brought to its kneel at the end of the First World War in 1918. But it was not just that. The war had its effect because it brought an end to many of the empires that were in existence in Europe at that time. So the likes of German Empire was brought to an end, and the German states, modern state, was created. The Russia Empire also was brought to an end, and the Soviet Union was the United Soviet Union, Socialist Soviet Union, USSR as it was called, was initiated in 1922. Okay, countries like Poland, Slovakia, Yugoslavia were equally created, okay, from the Austro-Hungary Empire at that time. So that was how the First World War ended in 1918. So for another 20 years, each of these countries were trying to build their economy, were trying to build the ruins that came upon each of these countries as a result of the war that was executed for 4 years within their territorial space. In the early 1930s, a young man in person of Adolf Hitler eventually became the new president of Germany. And he came up with his Nazist idea. He wanted to reclaim some of the lost territories by Germany in the First World War. So he started rebuilding the army of Germany into a formidable stage where they will be able to carry out aggressive invasions into some territories that have been taken over from them by these other Western allies that won the war at that time. So he started building his army base, and he was able to how will I put it? He was able to prevail over the thinking of many Germans that they felt the right thing for him to do was to expand the war, was to execute the invasion, as the case might be. But meanwhile, in doing that, he needed to take some strategic decision because their long-term enemy was France. So he needed to capture and get rid of France, but he knew that they could not fight the war from the two wings, the western wing and the eastern wing. Don't forget that to the east of Germany was Russia. So what he did basically was to strike an agreement, a deal with Russia to prevent Russia. Russia had to make an agreement of non-involvement with Russia because he knew he was going to execute a war or an invasion against France and a few other Western nations or countries as it were. So basically, once he has been able to get the consent from Russia that Russia was not going to involve in the war, he started his plan. So he invaded Portland. After invading Portland, of course, Portland he invaded Austria-Hungary, annexed it into Germany. He also invaded Portland. Now, as soon as he invaded Portland, okay, France and the United Kingdom declared war against Germany. All right, so and when they declared war against Germany, because of the strength of the military of Germany, because at that time they were the strongest and the most equipped army in the war. They were very good, particularly on the ground. So they were able to quickly overrun Netherlands, Belgium, and France. And those countries were now under the full control of Germany. So at that time, Germany was basically in control of 3/4 of European territory because they've been able to conquer a lot of the Western European countries at that time. The only problem Germany had as a country was the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom, like we said, is like an island. So if Germany was going to invade or capture United Kingdom, they would have to be stronger than the United Kingdom on the sea. So they were eventually building their submarine warfare against the United Kingdom. But after Germany saw that it was taking much of a longer time for them to be able to conquer Britain, the Great Britain, they decided to move their army from the west wing to the east wing. So he decided he was going to go and fight the Russians, because don't forget that the mindset of Adolf Hitler was that he wanted to control the entire European state and be able to also expand a little bit into the Central Asia, as the case might be. So given that at the back of his mind, he started launching attack against Russia, but they never left their attack. Just that they reduced the number of armies executing the war against the Great Britain. So as they were fighting, at some point, they were dropping missiles on a daily basis in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain, in London. And, you know, that was the time Winston Churchill became an hero of the United Kingdom, because ordinarily it was the resilience of Winston Churchill that helped the United Kingdom not to surrender to Germany. So it was the only country that Germany was to conquer was the United Kingdom and Russia. So they were doing well, okay? They were doing well when they entered Russia. So when they started fighting Russia, of course, that was what got Russia into the Second World War. All right, so they were moving very close to Moscow, which is the capital of the Soviet Union. Sorry, it was called Soviet Union. Between 1922 and 1991, when Soviet Union was dissolved, it was the United Socialist Soviet Republic. So basically, the USSR was now in war with Germany. And for the first 2 years, from 1941 to 1944, Germany had the upper hand. But unfortunately, if you check, the Russians are very close to the Northern Pole. Okay, so the weather during winter is always very bad. It's only the Russians that could navigate. So the machines of the Germans during the winter got stuck. Some of their machines could not work again. The snows were falling on them, so it was difficult for them to advance. So they had to stay back a little while USSR Russia was able to advance a counterattack on them, such that by 1914, the USSR, that is Russia, was able to capture Berlin, okay? And they were able to conquer the Germans, okay? So, but that never brought the war to an end, because Japan was equally trying to gain control of a larger part of Asia at that time. So, early before the Second World War, in the early 1930s, Japan had attacked China. China only became a country, a republic. It was an empire also, but became a country, a modern state in 1949. So Japan was able to conquer a good part of Asia. And basically at that time, Japan was in ally with Germany. So even though Germany had surrendered to Russia, Russia won that world war on the European soil, okay? But Japan refused to surrender. And unfortunately, in the aggressiveness of Japan, they attacked some of the shipments of the United States of America. And that was one of the things that also brought the United States of America into the Second World War. So when Japan refused to surrender, by August of 1945, United States of America tested its atomic bomb. They threw bomb into Nagasaki and Hiroshima. These are two major industrial states, regions or towns or cities in Japan. And as soon as they threw those bombs on the 6th and the 9th of August 1945, Japan had no other option but to surrender and to give up the continuation of the war. So that was how the Second World War ended. Okay, so while Russia won the war on the European soil, America won the war on the Asian soil, and that brought the war to a complete end. And you know, the aftermath of the Second World War brought about the emergence of two superpowers. Okay, the United Socialist Soviet Republic, USSR, on the East Wing, and USA on the West Wing. Now, I'd like to quickly make us say why we have a lot of allies, why USA would always have to ally with the Western world, and Russia, the Eastern Bloc. In 1492, USA was first discovered. The land or the territory was first discovered by Christopher Columbus after a voyage from Spain to the New World. It was called the New World at that time. If you remember, for many of us that studied economics in schools, you would remember the great Reverend Thomas Malthus that propounded the Malthusian theory. Okay, at that time, Europe was getting saturated, was getting used up. Their lands were becoming fertile, and Reverend Thomas Malthus saw that the way the trend was going, if care was not taken, the population of Europe was going at a geometric rate, while the food production was going at an arithmetic rate. And his conclusion was that something needs to be done to curtail the population growth, so that Europe, Western Europe at that time, in a matter of years, would not find themselves in a big economic trouble. So it was part of the stress, the conjunction of Europe by the European countries, the Spanish, the German, the British, the French, that led into finding an exploration into, okay, can we find other land that we can occupy and be able to, continue to enjoy our freedom and engage in farming. So that was why Columbus was able to secure partnership with the King of Spain, of the Spanish Empire at that time, and he was the first person that landed in the New World in 1492. And as soon as he was able to find America, that was called the New World at that time, he went back to Spain. The word spread. So people from France, from Germany, from Great Britain, from Poland, they started their voyage too, and every one of them eventually started taking a portion of the New World that was discovered. And that exactly explains the reason why most of the time the United States of America would always be in ally with the Western world, because about 12%, 12 to 15% of Americans are of German origin. Okay, they occupy the likes of the New York, Pennsylvania, and the likes. You find the French in, you find the French basically in places like California, Louisiana, and you find the Spanish basically in places like Florida, Nevada, California, and the like. So you will discover that it's just like the Spanish, the French, the British are the same people that find themselves in America. That was why in both of the First and the Second World War, United States of America did not enter or engage actively in participating in those wars until it became so necessary for them. So as soon as, the Second World War was ended, there were two blocks. Now, that entered into another phase that was called the Cold War. The Cold War was not a physical war, it was basically an ideological war, executed by these two major superpowers, Russia and the United States of America. So the Russia led the Eastern Bloc, the likes of China, the likes of North Korea, the likes of, these were countries, any country that has the sentiment of the communist ideology, okay? Whereas the Western Bloc was led by the United States of America in conjunction with the Great Britain, France, Germany, and a lot of other Western countries that shared the capitalist sentiment, okay? So it was just a war of ideology on the basis on how the countries of the world, or the economies of the world, of the countries of the world, should be managed at that time. So USSR formed the Eastern Bloc, and which is based on the communist ideology, and the United States of America formed the Eastern Bloc, which is based on the capitalist ideology. All right. So following the end of the First War, Russia, like we said, had a full control over the eastern part of Germany, while the US wing, the Western, the likes of France and Great Britain, had control over Western Germany. So you find mixed ideologies. Now, the Western Germany was tinted towards the capitalist movement, which is the USA, the Western wing, and the Eastern Germany was tilted towards the communist ideology. Okay, so one of the first problems we had was that there was a breaking, okay, of Germany into two, okay, the Western Germany and the Eastern Germany. So while USSR was in control of the Eastern Germany, the Western Bloc was in control of the Western Germany. That was one of the things that actually reflected the Cold War as it started shortly after the World War II in 1945. So there was now a tussle of power between USA and USSR. And that accumulated into a number of events or activities. Like we had the Korean War, where the North Korea, that was part of the Eastern Bloc, invaded South Korea in the early 50s. The South Korea was pro-capitalism, was in the Western Bloc. So the United States had to quickly send its army to South Korea to contain and to push back the North Korean army that was trying to invade the South Korean territory, as the case might be. That they were able to do successfully. But there was also this Vietnam War, which we also had a situation where the North Vietnam were basically in favor of the communist ideology, while the South were in favor of the capitalist ideology. But US was not able to have a lot of success in that. So we also had a situation in the early 60s where some revolutionaries in Cuba. Cuba is like a small island very close to the United States of America. So we remember this popular name, Castro, Pedro Castro, led the revolutionary movement, and he was trying to establish a communist or socialist state in Cuba. And the United States was not finding itself comfortable with that idea. So just like what happened in Russia and Ukraine, so the United States had to use the CIA, which was an intelligence organ established shortly after the World War, to invade Cuba. So what they did was the Cubans who exiled themselves into the United States were trained to return to Cuba and overthrow Pedro Castro, as the case might be. But unfortunately, they could not do that, and that made Castro to request for assistance from USSR, and USSR sent a nuclear weapon to Cuba. Now, the United States of America discovered that, or spotted that, the USSR has sent a nuclear weapon to its territory. So they now had a naval blockage. Okay, they sent their ships, okay, to take charge of the territorial waters to prevent Russia from sending more nuclear weapons to perimeters close to the United States of America. So basically, that lingered for months, and eventually there was an agreement that was made between USA and USSR, where USA agreed that they would never invade Cuba anymore, and USSR now agreed to take away the nuclear weapon from their territory. So that exactly was are some of the things that took place around, the period where we had the Cold War much more creating tensions, particularly between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. So within this period, we had the Western Bloc establishing NATO. NATO stands basically for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So we have two main countries from North America, that is Canada and USA, and the western half of Europe as members of NATO, while the USSR formed what they call the Warsaw Pact, okay, where they also have a kind of agreement, military agreement, with countries that shared with them the socialist or the communist ideology. So, as we would have it, by 1991, the Cold War ended because the Berlin Wall built by USSR was broken, and that eventually led into a situation where the USSR became less powerful, less aggressive, and because the weapon competition between USSR and USA was having a toll on its economy, and there were revolutions of offspring here and there. So when the Berlin Wall ended in 1989, there was also a situation where there were breakaways of nearly 14 different small countries from the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union broke into 15 countries, of which Russia became the custodian of the whole Soviet Union authority. So That was how a country like Ukraine broke out of Russia and became an independent country on its own. So that had been a kind of the history behind, Russia, Ukraine. They were basically the same country for nearly 100 years until 1991, when they had to break out and, they became a country on their own. Now, there was an agreement when the Soviet Union was breaking up into these smaller countries. And that agreement was the fact that NATO would not come near the territory of Russia. And basically, they will equally not admit any formal Soviet Union member into NATO. Because the moment a country, the reason why NATO was established in the first place was that if you check the map of Russia or the USSR map, you discover that it's a very vast land. Even till today, Russia occupies 2/10 of the total land mass of the entire world. Okay, it's about 20%, it occupies 20% land mass of the entire world. So you agree with me that most of the Western countries in Europe will always be suspicious of being attacked by Russia, because Russia had that strength in terms of the land mass, population, and the military might. So it was because of the need to protect themselves that made them to collaborate with the United States of America and Canada in establishing NATO. Now, once you're a member of NATO, there's an accord among them that any external aggression from any country against any of their members will mean that all the members of NATO would be in war with that country. That is what it means. And that also enables NATO to be able to establish its defense base in any of its country members. So, knowing fully well that if any of its hold members, any of the hold members of the USSR decide to join NATO, it will give NATO the full right to be able to establish its military base around Russia. Okay, so they had that gentleman agreement with USA and NATO that, okay, NATO was not going to admit any of its members. But unfortunately, that was not the case, because a number of the countries that broke out of USSR on the flanks of Russia are today members of NATO. Now, in recent time, Ukraine has been making moves to join NATO. And you see, the dynamics is of all the countries that broke away from Ukraine, from the Soviet Union or from Russia, Ukraine is the most powerful, because many of the military base of Russia, of Ukraine, at the time the Soviet Union was dissolved, were situated in Ukraine. Okay, so, and they have shared that long affinity that Russia still see Ukraine as part of itself. So even though Ukraine is an independent country, Russia feels that they cannot allow them to be too much pro-West, because allowing them to join NATO, for instance, will mean that NATO, by default, the United States of America, can set up a base, a military base around its territory. And if in 1960s, USA would not allow Russia to establish or to bring its nuclear weapon around its waters, then they are not also equally interested in admitting or allowing NATO to have its base around its territory. So that, of course, is perhaps the basis, because directly or indirectly, Russia had been surrounded by NATO countries. So it's like they are already encircled. So giving up Ukraine for them is like bringing NATO home, and that will make Russia to be very vulnerable to an attack from the United States of America. Another reason, like we said, that the Donbas region, the Donetsk and Luhansk, wanted to break away from Ukraine. But Ukraine declared that these countries are rebels. And given that they are rebels, there was a military execution on the eastern region. And this region shares border with Russia. Because many of us will have equally wondered why it was easy for Russia to move in very quickly into Ukraine. Like we have said, Ukraine has been a part of Russia. So they are connected by road, they are connected by water. So it was a former country. It's just like when if Nigeria tomorrow breaks up into 3 countries, it will be easy for anybody to enter the north, okay? To be able to enter the north from the west or from the eastern part of the country. So basically, the moment Putin admitted that these countries are now free or independent country on their own, it gives him a right to be able to enter Ukraine in order to defend or protect these 2 independent countries that Ukraine had failed to grant autonomy into. So this has been a bit of time might not allow us to have a full-fledged chronicle of why we have what we have today. But like we said, the point is that in terms of military might, Ukraine knows they cannot withstand Russia, because Russia had sent about 900 troops into Ukrainian territory, and as far as I know, Ukraine only had a military force of about 200,000 people, as the case might be. And aside from even the 900,000 troops that had been sent to the territory of Ukraine, there are about 2.1 or 2.2 soldiers lying in the wait in case it enters or it culminates into a full-fledged war. Well, there is belief that in the course of time, they will be able to bring reason to table, and a consensus or a negotiation would begin, an agreement will be reached between Russia and Ukraine. What Russia said they want is simple, that they don't want Ukraine to be admitted into NATO, and they want Ukraine to accept or to recognize the Donetsk Republic and the Luhansk Republic as an independent nation. But at the same time, Ukraine is a free nation of its own. It's an independent nation on its own, even though it shares a lot of history, because 1 out of every 6 Ukrainians speak Russian, and one third of Ukrainians or people that are living in Ukraine have a kind of historical affinity with Russia. So we would keep our fingers crossed and see how the event plays out. For us as Nigerians, of course, the interests might be on the impact of these crises on our economy, in the sense that we are going to have an upsurge, which we already have. The price of crude oil is well over $100 as we speak, and that's for a barrel of crude oil. That means more revenue for Nigeria, but it equally means that there will be more money that needs to be spent in paying for fuel subsidy, given that we still have to pay subsidy as a country. Do not forget that Russia is the third largest producer of crude oil, exporter of crude oil to the world. So we are going to have a lot of this crisis. One of the problems the wars have always created is that there will be uprisings, there will be revolutions here and there because of the difficult economic situations it puts various countries of the world into. But we hope that this is not going to last for too long. Unfortunately, we've had crises in Libya where NATO recognized the rebels, and NATO entered Libya outside Gaddafi, and we've had instability in Libya, and that had actually allowed some of these rebels to spread across the sub-Saharan Africa, and that's part of the reason why we have the problem of Boko Haram in Nigeria today, because a number of them have now been able to spread and particularly in the sales of illegal ammunition with which some of these Boko Haram had terrorized our country. We've also had problem in Syria, where NATO supported the rebels, and Russia supported Assad, who is the president of Syria, and that have actually created a lot of instability in that region for a long time. So this is also an European crisis, but given that it's more or less like the center of the world, we hope it's not going to have too much effect on the peace and economic stability of Nigeria, as the case might be. So that has been the little way I can chronicle the history for us. Sorry, we are limited by time. We have spent a little bit above an hour that we are supposed to. But we want to thank and appreciate you for being part of today's political discourse. We'd like you to drop your comments, and probably after this live section, you can always share videos. Remember that on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays by 7 p.m. Nigerian time, we're always uploading our content on Leadership Discourse, and on Saturdays by 6 p.m. we have our regular update on our political discourse. Things will get interesting, like we said, because we are just about 365 days to the Nigerian election. So very soon we're going to have more content trying to preview the politics of the Fourth Republic in the bid to determine who is going to be the Nigerian 17th president. Thank you for being part of today's live program. Thanks for your time and your audience. I hope we've been able to add to your knowledge base in terms of the world political history. We'll meet again last Sunday in the month of March, where we'll bring to you another live section. Thank you, and God bless everyone.